today we're going to be looking at Douglas, Massachusetts. Douglas is an amazing town. It's beautiful. It's still fairly rural. They've got a great park there to go walking around in. And they've also got an incredibly cool historic building. This is the E.N. Jenckes Store Museum. This was an actual museum that started up in the early 1800s and was continually a store. And then in the late 1900s, the store itself went out of business and it was bought by the Douglas Historical Society. So the Historical Society then set it up as a museum. So right now, you can go into it and visit it and see what the inside of a classic 1800s store looked like. They fixed it back up again so to show the way that it was back then. So this would have been the kind of general store that people in the 1800s, and this was before the Civil War even. So think of before the Civil War, people would go into their local store and they'd be buying, nails and fabrics and different kinds of salt and sugar and that sort of stuff. So it had all of those kinds of local staples that they couldn't make themselves. And then they would grow their own food, and then they'd cut their own wood from the local woods. And the store is a place for them to congregate and to talk about the latest news and so on. So it's really neat to go into the store and see what it would have been like, and imagine what it would have been like where you didn't mail order things from Amazon whenever you wanted them, or go into these giant Walmarts and other stores that we have nowadays. You just had one little store and you got to choose from whatever they had in that little store. And maybe there would be a little store in the next town over, or maybe you could go to Sutton and see what was in their little store. But in general, you would go to your local store because either you walked or you rode your horse. That's the only ways that you got around. So it's a pretty neat part of history, and we are going to do some watercolor drawings and sketchings and other celebrations of this. And while you're doing this kind of thing, again, think about what it would have been like for someone in the early 1800s to be living in Douglas. This is a time of horses and carriages, times of walking around. There were no cars, no electricity. People lit candles and lamps to have light. No radios, no TV, no internet. So a very different way of life. So let's see what I've got. So you can do this any way that you want to. What I'm going to do is I have watercolor paper. So I am going to put this design onto watercolor paper so that I can then watercolor it. So I have got the watercolor paper. I have some images of the store that are copyright free that I got from the web. So here's an image of it. I'm not sure if that's from the late 1800s. Photography only came in the late 1800s, so this wouldn't have been from the early 1800s. This could have been from the early 1900s, maybe. I'd have to take a look at the information on it. But in any case, you can see the general layout of the store. That it was a long, squarish building, and then you had the store entrance in the front, and then some other rooms up on the top. So this is a side view. I prefer a front view, but the front view that I found is a truncated view that doesn't have all the edges of it. So part of what we're going to talk about is ways to expand on an image when you only have a piece of it. And that's a very useful skill to have, because there are many times when you are looking at a scene, and if you're using a camera to get your initial shots, then maybe there's other things in the way, other buildings or trees or so on, where you can't get an entire picture in one shot, and you'll have to sit there and work on making other kinds of adjustments to it to be able to get the entire picture. And this is part of why it's good to learn sketching skills, because you can take pictures with your camera, and that's certainly useful, but it's also a good idea to learn how to sketch. And here's one of my cats coming to say hello. She's going to take some sips of the watercolor water while it's nice and fresh. I'll let her have some now before I do any watercoloring. Oh, apparently she doesn't want to. Apparently she's probably going to go drink from the fountain. Meow, indeed. Alright, I'm going to go over on your tower after you're done wandering around the scene for a little bit. That is good. Okie dokie. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to show you how to use tracing paper and graphite paper to transfer the basics of this image over onto our watercolor paper. And this is a great technique to learn as you're learning how to sketch. Hold on, and keep my cat from eating things that he should not be eating. I end up stuffing everything in my desk drawer so the cat does not eat them. Alright, so by using graphite paper and tracing paper, you can get an image to transfer from its source spot over into the destination paper that you want to actually do your drawing on. And certainly the more that you draw and practice and sketch, the more you can draw things freehand, which is a very good skill to learn. But if you're not at the freehand stage, or if you just want to trace it for some reason, or perhaps you want to make a base drawing for someone else that you're working with and that other person can then paint it in, learning how to use graphite paper and tracing paper is a great skill. So let me just grab the tracing paper here.